Fantastic. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Argo project Q&A with the creators of the project. We've got Hong, Jesse, and Alex on here. We've got some questions we're going to go through, but we're also taking questions from anybody that wants to join. So feel free to raise your hand in the chat and we can promote you to come on and speak and ask any questions, or feel free to ask them in the chat as well. So without any questions from the chat yet, why don't we start off with a discussion on what challenges the project went through to graduate? What did we have to overcome to get here?
To start, we have a lot to share, I feel.
Well, I guess it's like 5 years worth of stuff to go through, but
maybe let me start. So I think it's one unique thing about Argo is Argo is a core triple lit. Basically, Argo is not just one project. Not unlike others, like a lot of our other graduate projects they're well defined in a way is just one thing, like Harbor, just like Docker registry. But Argo has this long history. Started with Argo. But Argo was Argo workflows. And later we created this new project, Argo CD. So we need rebranding the Argo to be Argo workflows. Then we got Argo Rollouts, Argo events. So in the end, Argo is a suite of tools. So individually, it can even be considered as a sizable project. If you look at how much like community members are behind the Argo workflow vs how many people are behind the Argo CD. I think that is quite a unique challenge. I never saw that. I think we are the one of its kind for that process. So
I remember even before we joined CNCF, before project was donated to CNCF, we had to write a proposal, and the question was, how do we position Argo? And the answer was application delivery. So, but reality is Argo was like created to solve pains, and we never meant to choose a space first and then shape project around the space. We had to do it in a reverse way. We were building what people needed to effectively use Kubernetes, and then apparently we've created a set of projects that help to deliver applications. And applications could be long running, batch processing applications, and so.
Yeah, so I think the category is correct, but when we were applying for to be a CNCF project, they kind of made an exception for us because we had all 4 things under this umbrella. It was hard to just describe exactly what Argo is because it's actually 4 different things. So that was one, I guess one interesting thing that happened as part of graduation, and then the whole graduation process was like this really arduous 2-year-long process with CNCF. And yeah, they make you do a lot of things, especially around security. And so, yeah, and the project is much better for that process. I think it's a great, check to make sure we have we're following all the right things. So I think when you look at graduated CNCF projects, you can understand like what they go through to get that status. So.
I think we have different stories for each sub-project in regards to security. I think what the biggest challenge for Argo CD was basically we had to rethink how what we think about project in terms of security. So originally when project was created, we had this assumption that as soon as user of a project authenticated, you can trust that user. And when project, when we were going through security reviews and we're getting feedback from the people who was, looking at Argo, they look at the project from a different perspective. So they assumed that completely, strangers supposed to get access to a project, and you should, like, the project's supposed to provide effective ways to put them in a sandbox and let them use only what they're supposed to use. And we are not supposed to trust those strangers. Basically, think about it. If, let's say, there is a company which run Argo CD as a service, like Akuity, and Argo CD is supposed to be secure enough to isolate tenants from each other and provide appropriate security guards. And it was not the case 2 years ago, and I'm pretty sure now it's like with Titan, we've improved there a lot, and now it's safe to take one Argo CD instance and host people who don't know about each other.
Yeah, I think we got a lot of questions during the journey. Like everyone, hey, why aren't you guys going to graduate? When? We keep like seeing a different date there. I think it's all come back to, first of all, is this full project. It's kind of like we repeating same thing 4 times in the end to graduate the whole Argo umbrella. So it's just like a massive amount of work to make sure everything in a good shape. So, but we learned a lot. I would say like a lot of the valid feedback about the practice, about a particular how you expose the feature and those things. It just make it Argo eventually even better. I would say the graduation in a way is giving everyone kind of like a checkbox to say, hey, it's kind of validation. I mean, I never thinking security is kind of like you do a security review, you are done. It's always a live process. But you kind of like have a live process, have these people have this trained mindset. It just will naturally be way better than without any process and practice in place. So which is I really appreciate that whole process to get us to the current state. And yeah, regarding like even we talking about a lot about security, I want to clarify one very important thing. We take the security very seriously from day one. We never compromise on that. It's just like I would say, it's more about the sort of like posture-wise, like, oh, can we do more a much formal thing? Especially you need that formal thing when you have a very vibrant community, because if you only have 2 developers under the community, that's easy. But if you have like 800 contributors in a project, I think everyone will be appreciated to have some process in place and governance in place to ensure we're doing the thing in a proper way.
Yeah.
So it seems like we've covered a lot about the graduation here. During all of this process, did you ever lose faith that the Argo project was going to be a huge tool, a huge part of the ecosystem?
I don't think so. I think I want to be transparent here is we do share some level of frustration to say why the process took so long. And I mean, it's kind of natural, I would say. So because in their process, they say, hey, they normally will graduate within a year. Then why we graduated within like 2 years, right? Everyone will ask that question. So we do share some level of frustration there, but overall, I think we still benefit from the whole process, no doubt. And during that process, like I think, to be honest, the graduation is one thing, but the most important thing, if you look at it the past year, like we got the nice recognition from the CNCF by, I'm not saying like CNCF recognized, but it's like CNCF present that hard evidence to say there is like 150% more people are picking Argo as the choice. It's kind of like call out over the 2021, like the year, a highlight of the 2021. I think those small things, big things are actually just like keep us like very, very happy in a way to say, oh, everyone love it, right? And not to mention, like every time you go to a particular event, including especially the KubeCon, I don't know how many times people will start with their opening like conversation is, hey, I love Argo. Then I always throw back the next question is, which one? Yeah. Because there will be a slightly different conversation there are three kind of conversation. One is, oh, I'm using for the data processing, I'm using workflow and events. Great, okay, let's talk about it. Another guy is, oh, GitOps, Argo CD and rollouts. I'm doing the blue-gray, fine. The last but the most exciting one, I use all four. Okay, you are the hardcore Argo user, so let's talk about it. How did you get there? I think all those things never kind of always charging us in a way to make us very excited there. So I never thinking I have the state, I'm losing the face. I never losing the face on the product, but sometimes maybe we be a little bit frustrated by the process.
Yeah, I maybe can share my personal perspective. I never been frustrated by it because Argo was created in the end user company. So every open source adoption and then recognition at CNCF, it was, to be honest, unexpected bonus that became eventually even bigger than adoption at Intuit itself. So we were happy when Intuit developers liked the tool and started adopting it. At the same time, we had this competition, for basically our attention from open source. And that was like even more exciting that some other companies also wants to adopt it. So, and then graduation is like, it's a cherry on top of a big cake. So no reason to complain, to be honest.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, when you're talking about losing faith, I have to go back to Argo V1. When before we actually rewrote it, and I mean we rewrote it for a reason. And it's because it wasn't, the first version didn't resonate because it was just this giant, massive platform that we built as a startup that got Appliedix. And yeah, so we rewrote it for a reason because it wasn't resonating. So that's when you rethink, okay, what do we need to change to make this more tenable to users? And that meant breaking it down into more consumable pieces. But after that, like I agree with Alex, after the acquisition by Intuit, we're just building it for ourselves. Like we weren't building it. It happened to be open source, and sure, if other people would benefit from what we put out there as open source, that's just icing. But we had a mission at Intuit just to satisfy the Intuit enterprise use case, and so that we were assured that like that was all that we needed to really focus on, right? The open source adoption was a bonus.
Was there any point in that journey where you felt like it switched from being Intuit focused to being like open source focused?
Mm-hmm. I feel like it happened when Intuit basically we start getting more requests from open source community, and we realized that everything that open source community asking us to do is eventually going to be adopted by Intuit, but maybe like 6 months later. And so in a way, community was way ahead of Intuit. Like small companies obviously can adopt advanced features better. And then through experience, we realized that pretty much everything that is suggested or requested by open source users eventually find a use case at Intuit. And this is where we kind of switched. Yeah, we were, thanks to open source community, we were kind of way ahead of Intuit needs. And I think that was the moment when it became clear that,
Maybe a really good example of this is when Argo CD was built, it was actually only supported KSonnet. KSonnet, for those of you that don't know, was this config management tool that Heptio built, and it's based off of JSONnet, which is like JSON++. Like it's a language that is an advanced version of JSON. And we chose KSonnet because that's also the config management tool that we felt most appropriate to be used by Intuit. But obviously the whole open source community is not going to converge on KSonnet. And so we had to expand that to support things like Helm or just raw YAML. And despite Intuit not using all those features, we built it for the benefit of the open source community. And that's when you start seeing the mindset kind of change. Like, okay, we're building this for everyone, not just for Intuit.
I had another example. That example that made us to really like rebuild Argo CD a lot and improve scalability. So we've got a bug report explaining that someone was trying to deploy Istio using Argo CD, and it was just dead slow. And then we looked at it, we realized that, yeah, what if some of our users wants to deploy Istio as well? How do we deal with it? And so we spent maybe like 3-4 months kind of rebuilding an important piece of Argo CD. And then 6 months later, we've got such user. And it was really like a moment of relief. We were really happy. We listened to open source and we did the change way ahead of time and we got prepared.
Yeah, I think my view maybe is not directly related to feature and those things. Is when we trying to thinking more about the longevity for the future of the project. So we have this vision when we at Intuit already started discussing about so how we can make the whole project to be more sustainable. Because first of all, this project was created by an end user, means we are the user, we are not a vendor. Not unlike many other projects like on there, even our, I think, rivalry Flux there, I will call the name, but so it's kind of like we are end user. So we are thinking about, since there is a good adoption, so we really thinking the Argo should be a brand and should be a project, a settled project to have this sustainable future. That's where we are thinking, okay, that's the turning point. I think I'm pretty happy. At that time, we kind of like worked with the Red Hat team. And I remember I even talked with a lot of teammates thinking about how we can share the knowledge with Red Hat team in an efficient way. So we are super appreciative that Red Hat team eventually picked up, especially the application set, the controller feature. So it's sizable work, it's very impactful, but it's also relatively independent because we started that with Argo project labs instead of the Argo project. But I'm super happy, like this year, we finally merged that big piece of work into the main Argo CD. So that kind of like a great way, like great execution plan, I would say in the end, is how we can have another big player to get involved to make the project to be more sustainable, rather than it's more like a closed system there. So in a way, I was thinking our approach and just thinking about how diverse and how vibrant, like, for example, we're talking about Intuit because we all was at Intuit in a way. Intuit right now only have 1/3 of the contribution coming from Intuit. Unlike some other project, you will see, oh, 95% is from one vendor company. But because of this 1/3, and we still have such a vibrant community, that's just like another strong signal to see why Argo is in a much stronger position, because it does have this sustainable future. And I didn't mention ArgoCon in my closing statement for the ArgoCon. So I'm not sure everyone pay attention there, but when you have a conference, it's very common you see a vendor company to sponsor it, for example, ArgoCon. As the Akuity, sure, we are the Argo enterprise company for Argo, we are happy to pay the money to be the sponsor. But when you see, like in 2020, it was Intuit and BlackRock, which they have no vendor interest, they sponsor it first. Then in 2021, that was the first ArgoCon fully virtual. And in this year, the 2020, we had this ArgoCon physically, actually in Bay Area, also as virtual. And everyone will also notice that it's Intuit plus Adobe. So I was super surprised, but I'm also super happy to see Adobe was willing to sponsor a tool they are picked and they are used. That really means something. So it's not like you will see AWS is sponsor all the event, Google is sponsor all the event. We are sure they are the cloud provider, they sponsor it. But when you see Adobe sponsor some, okay, maybe Photoshop related or creativity related, their product related event, makes sense. But when you see Adobe is sponsoring ArgoCon, I think that's a trophy for me, to be honest. So that's another sign to me is Argo is such a strong community and such a strong product compared with others. I think you can bring that mindset to look at others. First one, if you see a sponsor is not a vendor related, I think it will be rare. That's very unique to Argo.
So we've had a lot of talk about the past, and we've gotten a couple of questions about what the future is going to look like for the Argo project now that we've graduated.
Jesse,
maybe
go ahead.
I want to before I talk about the future, I wanted to share the lesson we learned from the first attempt to create Argo. So not to create Argo, like the first attempt was to build a tool that does everything. It covers the whole DevOps story, basically from like cluster management to end user developer experience. And then what we learned is it doesn't work. Like you cannot create the whole thing and think of all the possible edge cases. It has to be done layer by layer. And then efficient way to do it is to pick one use case and just nail it. And so Argo has 4 projects, means 4 use cases. And what that means, it gives us chance to do it really well. At the same time, it's basically set a boundary. Like you will never see Argo CD doing secret management because it's not for secret management. It doesn't make sense. There are other awesome projects that basically excel at secret management and a ton of examples. So that means Argo kind of is going to keep evolving, but only in a particular direction. And we still have a ton of additional use cases that have to be solved to provide a good developer experience. So yeah, and now maybe back to a question like what is going to happen with Argo CD after graduation. So part of answer is the existing projects are going to keep evolving in one particular direction, and there is still a ton of work. At the same time, I think we should not stop and ignore other use cases which are not covered. Yeah, and then now I don't have exact answer. Like I know that, who knows, maybe Argo itself will get a 5th project or Akuity will create another open source project. And yeah, anyone has to add anything?
Jesse?
I see Jesse wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I think I really like our approach that we did with like the labs and how we can kind of allow the community to develop complementary projects and let us also decide if it's something that should be included into the Argo project or just remain as a secondary project. So I think I can see that pattern kind of continuing. I think there will always be supplemental projects that kind of enhance the experience. And we'll create some of those things too, like ourselves. Like it's appropriate for some things to be part of Argo CD core, and it's inappropriate for other things. But one thing we also focused on was, as Alex and I are kind of very conscious about bloat, and we don't want this thing to keep getting bloated with more features. And so that's why we shifted our attention to kind of extension mechanisms, right? Config management plugins, like we get all these requests to add, can you support, I don't know, some random config management tool, or in the rollout case, we always kind of get requests to add ingress controller support. And so we're trying to think of ways like, okay, how can we enable this use case, but without kind of making it part of the core features. Some of the things like, are obvious, like Helm. Helm is so ubiquitous that it has to be part of a core feature. But others maybe not, right? So building out those extension mechanisms to unblock and enable other integrations to happen is something we focus on. UI extensions is like another great example of like the direction we want to go, keep going in the future. I mention it every time I can because I want the community to kind of latch on to that mechanism to kind of build out functionality and capability in Argo CD UI. So that's kind of where I see future work happening.
Yeah, I think another thing I want to add to Jesse's point, because I want to cover the configure management, the traffic shaping, and also about the UI extension. So, but I also want to just continue on that. Is the whole point is Argo. I know everyone loves Argo because Argo has like a great GitOps story plus the like a world-class level like developer experience. But sometimes kind of like coming to us and say, hey, we don't need that fancy UI. We just want a simpler way of deploying things. But I think a lot of people have that perception, which is wrong, because Argo is such a modularized component. So I really want to thinking we need some more time to also, in a way, to just like present the Argo more from a different angle. For example, I will take every single chance to mention this Argo CD core development. So it's basically a stripped down the UI API server. It's like we call it, I would say can call it GitOps engine. Basically, you can deploy to a single cluster. When you need the UI, when you feel you need the UI, you can even bring up the UI using the Argo CD CLI, just local to you. So in a way, it is super lightweighted, super easy to start. There's not much of the expectation. UIs API is super resource conservative there also. I think those are things like we did a lot of great work. I think my job in a way is I have this mission after graduation is I just want to make sure those features or those different perspectives can be more appreciated by the community. Just let them know about this, let them know how they can use the Argo even in a different way to solve their problems.
And I think that leads well into another topic is like what challenges are not being solved by the current tooling available?
I think that this is what I was trying to describe is, I guess what's not solved yet is, so Argo CD itself is a set of tools that help developers manage Kubernetes and effectively implement different deployment strategies, handle batch processing use cases. But each and every company that adopt Argo has to go through a journey and adopt all these 4 tools somehow. And then we worked at one of such companies. We observed how users did it. And then there is obviously a lot of similarities. So every company had to reinvent basically this more or less the same pattern. And so, not in a perfect way. In most cases, it's kind of glue code or scripting, and that doesn't give a good user experience. And so basically the good user experience is still not there. It's like the use cases that are solved by Argo projects are solved really well, but developers kind of have to still jump between different UIs. If you do CI using workflows and if you use Argo CD to manage it, you have 2 independent pages that you need to look at, which is not great. And this is yet to be solved. And I'm not even sure if it's going to be solved as part of Argo.
Yeah, I think I second what Alex is saying about everyone installs Argo and then they sync a single app and they if everything works perfectly, but then they're kind of, okay, now what? How do I what's the user experience that I need to give to our developer teams, right? So I'm falling in love with the tool, but there's this still all this day two stuff operations that that developer teams are gonna, what do they do day in and day out as they're kind of pushing changes to their app. So Argo CD doesn't solve that by itself, and so what Alex is saying is like everyone builds out their own bespoke type of solution that kind of repeating over and over again the same patterns.
And I mentioned, one UI, but I think it's not the use case I was referring to. So, like, if I take Argo CD as example, it automates a set of actions that every developer does to manage Kubernetes, which is kubectl apply, kubectl diff, pretty much. But it empowers a lot of developers to do it very easily by just, I don't know, clicking a button once and you enable autosync and it happens in the background for you. And so there are more such use cases that developer kind of do manually right now. For example, they click sync button 3 times to sync dev and then staging and then production. It has nothing to do with a single user interface, but it's basically waste of time. So that's one example. Another example is, I don't know, could be in workflow space when developers use workflows to process data, and they need to kind of stitch together a bunch of workflows to create data processing pipeline. And that's, so basically, I'm trying to describe a set of actually like real life use cases that developers have to implement by doing solution engineering, not just the user interface that let you see, data from 2 products in one. Jesse, you
Sorry, though. That reminds me that so far we've been talking a lot about CD, but on the workflow side, I tell people that workflow is like a general purpose engine, right? It's not solving a specific use case. So our vision was always that workflows would be like an underpinning to some higher level application specific thing. And so one of the maybe you might still see something called Argo-CI in the Argo project repo. That was actually a early attempt to kind of build a CI system that leveraged Argo workflows under the covers. I think there's future products I think there could be built that are and there already are, like things like Kubeflow and that kind of leverage workflows as like a engine, but I can see things like CI systems and other things being built on top of workflows.
So I wanted to do a quick tangent here based on one of the questions from the chat. Maybe you can tell us a bit more about where the logo came from and why it's a spacesuit. Or is it a spacesuit?
I know that logo was created within a few days by awesome designer who worked at Appletics, Rahul. So, and I think he just got inspiration suddenly to create a logo. But name Argo was chosen because we wanted something associated with, Kubernetes, and so, that's why it's like, sea, like ocean related. Another animal that lives in a Kubernetes ecosystem. That's my.
Oh well, actually, I think Argo, Argonaut is a actually type of octopus.
Oh yeah. That's, I forgot to mention.
But it's also the passengers on the ship Argo with the Jason and the Argonauts who were in the search of the Golden Fleece. So it's actually this 3-way tie-in that would actually fit really. I'm very impressive with Rahul and Pratik that when they came up with that. I have no idea why the spacesuit exists though. That I can't answer that because
Yeah. Is it a spacesuit or is it a helmet with water so that he can be outside of the ocean?
I like
maybe
it.
it's both.
Yeah.
Because an octopus should require water, so maybe he goes into space with water inside.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I'm glad we've solved that.
Yeah.
So we talked a bit about how the project started at or was very enterprise focused at Intuit, and then it transitioned to kind of more of an open source project as you wanted to be able to experiment faster and implement features that, you know, would take a while for an enterprise environment to implement. So how did you transition from that into wanting to start a company dedicated to Argo and to you know, GitOps tooling?
Maybe I should take that question. So I think me, Jesse, Alex, three of us both feel we should be getting more challenged. I think it's a great and wonderful journey at Intuit, to be honest. Like, we are pretty happy that in about 3 years, we were able to refresh the whole infrastructure of the Intuit. So we basically originally, I think under the impression they have more like a lift and shift strategy. Basically, you are running the VM on VMware in a private data center. You are going to run an EC2 VM on AWS as your cloud strategy. But when we joined Intuit, we are very proud in the end, we were able to actually move. I think the majority in the end, all the TurboTax QuickBooks are running on container, on Kubernetes, on AWS, and powered by Argo. So that kind of like one of its kind achievement for us. So while there are still a lot of the things still need to be done, but we are in Silicon Valley, so we always want to challenge ourselves for the next thing. I would say, be transparent here, some levels of entrepreneurship, and plus, I think we see the need that it's great product, but as a vendor, will still very beneficial to the whole community, because not every company can afford, you have even just half an engineer just focus on to babysit or figure out everything there. So I think when you're talking about a sizable company, you may have 2-3 people just trying to figure out how to adopt Argo, how to adopt very effectively. I think that's definitely a true opportunity there. But in the other way is, you know, the big company normally, like sometime you need to shift your focus, because in a way, I would say, a lot of the big features has been delivered to Intuit. So in a way is we might need to shift focus on some other things, because the Intuit like has a lot of the other developer tools we have to focus. That might be in the end, maybe me, Jesse, Alex will be split and working on big different things at Intuit. I think Argo just gave us the excuse in a way, hey, we still want to work together. And we still want to work on Argo because we still have a lot of things we want to finish here, and we want to make sure it's in a good shape there. I think trying to run a company backed by the VC, be able to still continue working on something we are very passionate about, it does make sense. Hopefully that answers your question there.
Yeah, and I just to add to that, so you know, so Hong mentioned we knew people would need help, and we were really best positioned to help them, because having operated this, we knew like all the issues people would start running into after running at scale. And so, you know, when we set out to build out our architecture, we addressed some of those things in a lot of our architectural tweaks that we did to it, but still providing the same Argo experience. So basically, based on our learnings of like, okay, if we're if this is going to scale to like 4,000 engineers, and there's some things that got to change. So that was one part. So the kind of the technological improvements and aspects that we can build a product around. So, but the other thing is, like, I think we kind of touched on it earlier, is that Argo solves just part of the problem. And we want to solve more. Like, I don't think Akuity, long term should just be known as the Argo company, right? Like, we have a lot kind of bigger plans on what we want to do that will fit in definitely with the Argo ecosystem, but we will have things that stand by themselves.
I want to add something. Yeah. I can share my personal motivation, especially in the first days. Basically, at Intuit, we had a lot of engineers who we had to help, and that's why we invested whatever resources necessary to build tools for engineers. We never had a chance to take care of administrators because it was our own team, like few engineers who were running Argo CD, and then we never had a chance to like improve anything related to help to this relatively small group within Intuit. But if you're a company and you are helping like potentially hundreds of companies, then it makes sense to invest into a product. And so I was motivated by it because obviously we had so many ideas how we could help ourselves, and we never had a chance to actually work on it. Now it totally makes sense at Akuity. So it was so attractive, basically, like if you already know what to do and you're starting, joining a company, starting a company, to just start executing it, and with the 100% confidence that it is a real pain, because we went through that pain and we know basically solutions that can solve it. So yeah, it was like no-brainer.
It's really interesting to see the three different perspectives on the motivation to form a company to kind of back the Argo project. It's really fascinating to see that journey from thinking mostly internal, supporting your customers or just the other engineers at the company, versus now thinking broadly to who can we support across a number of different companies and provide, value and support to all of them. We did get a question from the chat here, which I think we touched on a little bit earlier, but we could discuss a bit more. So it's a question related to secret management in Argo CD, and thoughts on native support for secret management versus separate tooling.
I have my opinion on it, and it's also probably not the same opinion of other even maintainers or even the community, but my philosophy is like secret management is so important that like you need a project dedicated and focused on this, all security aspects, and so basically what I'm saying is there's other tools that do much better job for doing that, and I think for Argo to build in like a secret management, it would always pale in comparison to like these focus tools that is concentrated in that. So I take a more of a integration approach or philosophy to this. The same is true for config management, right? That was actually one of the earliest decisions like we made, was like, okay, we're not going to focus on config management. Let's see what's out there, and we'll integrate with that. Like that happened to be KSonnet to start out with, and that will be the tool that we integrate with to handle config management. So I secret management kind of falls into that. Now, what's missing today is actually that integration that I just mentioned, and so rather than build out a secret management feature in Argo CD, we have to find ways where we can integrate with it. And so far there things that integrate really well are things like external secrets, right? External secrets is probably one of my favorite secret management tools, because you're just treating the secret management just like any other public, non-sensitive resource that you GitOps in your Git repository. And then the tool itself handles the population of the secret in the Kubernetes cluster. And I like that even more so than, like, say, the Vault plugin, because it's the Vault plugin, Argo CD still sees the secret during the repo server manifest generation. So it's still, in my opinion, it's still not removed far enough away from it from a security standpoint, right? I think the closer you can get that secret into the next to the application, the better, in my opinion. So.
And I want to add about integration. I just posted link to the Vault plugin that you mentioned, Jesse. So basically, this integration kind of exists already, and and maybe there are use cases or just users who likes to do this secret management in Argo CD space. So it makes sense. I doubt we will ever have first-class support for like Vault in Argo CD, because I think we already made decision to support config management tools itself through plugins, and this config management plugins functionality keep evolving, and I'm pretty sure there is a space as well to integrate with secret management solutions better through config management plugins.
I think that's all of the questions that we have here. Is there any final thoughts you guys would like to leave out on?
It's a journey, I would say. So when looking back is, I think it does come in, the foundation is from the hard working. Basically, you have this small idea, you have the passion, you grow it, you got a feedback, you make it better. And then more people participated, more people give you the feedback, solving all the problem. I think a lot of things can go wrong there. So I'm not going to brag about it. Hey, it's just because me or because of Jesse, because Alex, we made this far. I feel there so many people got to participate during the journey. I would say, including the engineer side, the partnership side, community side, even politics side. There are a lot of things playing a role on the whole journey to reach the current status. When looking back is I feel more grateful, like we can finish that journey in a way. I mean, not finish, that's the wrong way to say. We can anchor the journey with a huge milestone and put an even stronger foundation for the future. So I'm very grateful for that. So I actually got a lot of questions, people asking me about, oh, we want open source days and how we can open source that. It's sometimes from a vendor, sometimes from an end user, because they all buy in this open source story. I think normally I always start with, you need to open source something simple but powerful to basically you can easily like bring the value to the others. But if you're always starting with something big, complicated, like only a tiny set of people may need it or may consider using it, then you will soon feel frustrated because that's a totally different story. I think I'm pretty happy that all Argo project, we can explain that in one sentence. So just like people, I mean, it doesn't mean people will say every single people will understand, but people has the infrastructure, has the Kubernetes background, they immediately will get it, what it's doing. I think that's the most important thing I think we did right with all Argo project.
Yeah, and I think the community, like listening to their use cases, taking it seriously, I think we always, I think it came from a place where like we don't always know what's, or actually usually we don't always know the right answers, and like we have to think outside of our box, like where what we think is, we only have a limited view of what works for a certain organization, but but always listening and understanding what our users, this is, I think, what attributed a lot of our success. That plus the focus on user experience was always top of mind. And I think a lot of I think open sources are very technical in nature, and they focus a lot on like super experienced engineering. But I think a lot of times what you have to do is focus on the engineers that don't want to take the time to learn and research, and you have to make that experience a lot easier for them. And that's another thing that I attribute to our success.
I have nothing to add, to be honest. Yeah, I guess one thought is, I think it's literally like we are far away from end of a journey. I think we basically just, we solved a set of, use cases that every company in one way or another way have to solve. This is great, but it's just a foundation to build the next layer, and then there will be another layer, and so on. And then I don't even think we considered all the possible use cases, because before Kubernetes, GitOps was not really an option because it was too hard to have to have a way to just have an important thing that you can run, and it just pushes your whole infrastructure from Git to like a real infrastructure cloud. So with additional tools, we opening possibility to implement more additional use cases, and then we reveal like unsolved problems that we have to create tools for, and the process repeats. So I think we have a lot of work to do going forward.
Well, this was fantastic. Thank you guys for answering all of these questions and giving us all this insight onto the project. Thank you for everyone that joined on Zoom and on LinkedIn. If you have any questions for any of us about Argo, you can always find us on the CNCF Slack channels. We're happy to answer any questions or help understand how the Argo project can solve your challenges with scaling and GitOps and Kubernetes. This is great. Congratulations to the Argo project.
Thank you. Very last, thank you, Nick, for doing the moderation. Appreciate your help here. All right.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.